Welcome back, everyone, to the Chiefs Catalyst podcast, designed to provide short, insightful, and informative episodes for the dynamic public safety leaders of today. The Chiefs Catalyst is for those who are looking for ways to streamline their departmental operations and increase efficiency and effectiveness through people, strategies, and technologies. If you like what you hear or want to discuss a topic further, send us an email at catalystpodcast@proton.me. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of the Chiefs Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Aiden, and today we're going to be talking about considerations for implementing technologies. So through past episodes, we've discussed the business aspects of law enforcement, using law enforcement data, and considerations for implementing AI technologies at your local police department or public safety entity, and also how technology can influence your daily operations. Today's discussion will focus on some considerations for managing these implementations. If you're a public safety leader or crime analyst, it's likely that you've gone to some type of training or conference, maybe the IACP Tech Conference or the International Association of Crime Analysts Conference, whatever conference is, and there's been some type of vendor there. Well, it's really fun to go and talk to all the vendors and see the new products, especially now with all of the technology that is coming out, because it's definitely tools that can make our lives easier in public safety. However, just because something is shiny and new doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fit well into our agency's current operating environment or infrastructure. So today we'll talk about some of the considerations to make when we do decide to move ahead with a technology or a product and go ahead with that implementation. It's easy to go to conferences and things and get distracted by this shiny new thing, right? Whatever the latest and greatest is. But it's important to evaluate technology procurements with a few things in mind. One of the things that you should ask yourself is, how does this fit into our agency's strategic vision and goals? So, for example, the agency that I work for is challenged by our council to continue providing excellent municipal services. A lot of products and things can fit that need, which is good because it's broad. As it dwindles down, our department strives to institutionalize crime analysis. We standardize our response to calls for service, citizen complaints, that type of thing. And then we leverage technology to increase our efficiency and effectiveness to make our town a safe place to live, work, and visit. So when we procure new technology, we want to make sure that it kind of fits into those things. If it can accomplish those tasks, then fantastic, it might fit into our ecosystem. But there's some other things that we have to ask. The next question is good to ask is, does this product duplicate any of our current systems or processes? I'm not saying does it streamline any of our current processes, because there's a lot of products out there that will help you streamline your workflow, which is important. But locally in Texas, there's a product called Leaders. It's a DWI templating system that helps officers kind of go down a quick checklist, template their warrant, maybe a blood warrant for DWI, and then send it through the internet to a on-call judge. It was a fantastic product. But our CAD and RMS actually has a similar function through templating. And so in this case, if we were to go and procure that product, if we had to buy it, we might say, hey, we can accomplish the same thing in one of our current tools without having to go and procure or use a separate tool. So does this duplicate any of our current systems or processes? You don't want to have to spend money twice if you don't have to. Another question to ask is, does this complement or integrate into any of our current systems, or will it be its own standalone product? You might say, well, I want everything to integrate in together, or I want everything to work seamlessly in one pane of glass. Absolutely, that's helpful. But consider things like officer wellness or peer support. You may want it to be completely separate or a subset of your current single pane of glass, because you need that data to not be integrated with everything else. You may need it to pull information from some of those other systems, and so you want that cooperating environment. But you may not want the chief or the administrative lieutenant or professional standards IA lieutenant to be able to see every single note that a peer peer support person puts in their counseling files, because you're protecting people's identities until something reaches a certain threshold. Whatever it is, you might want it integrated, but it might also need to be integrated but separate. On the flip side, if you're looking for cameras or community engagement tools, it's super beneficial when there is an integrative component that fits into your single pane of glass. And where we see this often is like real-time crime center products. You want a real-time crime center product that's going to bring in lots of disparate data, lots of disparate tools that you might have into one clean, smooth operating environment. So, does the product complement or integrate into our current systems, or will it be a standalone product? You may also ask, can we do this in-house? There are some products that you might be able to do in-house. Think dashboarding like Power BI or Tableau, visualization tools, or maybe internal web-based platforms like a SharePoint site or something like that. But building a product in-house could create substantial burden for your agency, or put your agency in a place where one internal stakeholder has all of the institutional knowledge for that device. For example, if you task somebody with building a SharePoint site, there are vendors out there that will help you develop a SharePoint site and give you an agency management platform. But you could accomplish a lot of the same thing with an internal person who could learn SharePoint. Well, if you've got one person who knows your site inside and out, who's got to stay on top of it anytime Microsoft does an update, who's got to go in and customize things or code things when they break, and that person wins the lottery and leaves, your agency could have a major gap that isn't filled because all that institutional knowledge is placed in one person whose salary and benefits took care of that product. So while you could build something in sight, is it worthwhile? Is it the best case, or is it the best use of department funds? Or is it something that we could better pay an outside vendor to do to help streamline our internal operations? For this discussion, we're going to make the assumption that the technology we're implementing today has been researched and identified, fits into your agency's goals, it doesn't duplicate processes, it's not easily replicable in-house, and if you, the chief, are on board, you're ready to implement. So it is helpful pre-project to educate stakeholders as to what the technology product is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and set some expectations. And this is important because oftentimes we think about those stakeholders being high level, like command staff stakeholders. Well, if your command staff are the ones who are the daily people using that system, that's great. But oftentimes we at the high level make a decision that impacts our line level personnel. Pre-project, we need to be communicating clearly expectations, priorities, what this product does, how it's supposed to help us, all of these things with our line personnel who will be our hands-on implementers, who will be using it day in and day out. This is important to help set their expectations, but also so that when there's a problem or something pops up, they don't just immediately bash the product and turn away and say, it's better the old way. No, maybe they can help find a solution, or maybe they have better knowledge to go, hey, we're asking the system to do something that it's not intended to do. We were instructed, clearly communicated with what it's intended to do. That's outside its purpose. So we don't need to worry or fret that it doesn't do this thing. So communication is key to educate stakeholders pre-product. Now, recently at our agency, we did this with an internal group and a vendor as we were looking at implementing a live 911 software that streams 911 calls to first responders. This is complementary to a drones as first responder program. This demo resulted in a discussion internally and brought up some questions that we had yet to consider. We left the meeting then with next steps to have an internal process meeting, develop an SOP or a general order, and answer some of the possible legal and technical questions that arose from the line level staff that were in the room. So this being said, a great first step is to identify your implementation team and your project leader. Keeping in mind, sometimes the project manager is best suited to live in information technology, your town's IT or city's IT department, but it also could be your agency subject matter expert. For example, I have the benefit of being the manager of our license plate reader and real-time crime platform implementation and integrations. But during a recent conversation with a vendor, they asked us who our project champion would be. I really like this word because it gives you an opportunity to allow somebody who is passionate about a new product or project, who's excited to bring it to your agency, who's willing to lead the project well, encourage people, communicate, and drive the implementation forward. But they asked us to identify who this project champion would be, and then bring them into the team, whether or not they're the leader of the team, because you might need somebody at the command level to lead it because of hierarchical responsibilities, but you need a project champion who can help be that driving force forward. Now, once an implementation team, which likely turns into your power user team after implementation is complete, is established, it is a good idea to establish the scope of the project and codify the goals both internally and with the vendor. What we want the end product to be, what everyone's responsibilities are, etc. In the private sector, we know this is a statement of work, right? This is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. This is what the expectations are moving forward. And then anything from that is a deviation or maybe a change in scope. But you want to be careful to make sure that scope stays on point and on task for the project so that your project actually has an end line or an end goal or a finish line. And we know this is basic project management. However, during this process for technology implementation specifically, you'll want to be sure to cultivate relationships with your IT department and make sure their questions are answered and they're on board with how a project needs to go. This is where when you're communicating with your internal stakeholders pre-project, it's important to bring them into this conversation. In the last year, we had another product that we were trying to implement and integrate for our agency. And our IT rose some concerns with one of the software products that was being used to power this connection. They said, hey, we're not super sure about the security of this product. We've seen it fail in some areas before, and so we'd like to find another way. Well, for the vendor, there was one way that this data came out. Fortunately for us, it's the same tool that one of our other law enforcement sensitive systems runs through. So we were able to confidently say, hey, it's the same thing that our governmental data system uses. It's going to be okay. We're going to make it work. But there was a miscommunication or a misunderstanding at the front of that could have been negated had there been good, clear communication on the outset so that your internal stakeholders from other departments don't become an unintentional roadblock because of a misunderstanding or a murky understanding about the scope of the project and the departmental needs. Now, you'll want this power user or implementation team to be compiled of also line level educators who then conduct the in-depth initial training and product education with your end users. It's good to have somebody of hierarchical rank on your team, maybe like a lieutenant or a captain or a division commander, because when you need to have a little bit of leverage or muscle brought in to help move a project forward, they kind of have the stars and bars to help make that happen. But your internal partners who are using it every single day, your patrol officers, it's important to include some of them on these projects so that as they are out in the field, they're not just teaching people how to do it hands-on in field training, but they're asking questions. They're there to have questions asked of them. They're bringing up other resources, and they're helping build up and communicate well this product in its implementation. Now, as a chief, when implementing technology in a multi-generational workforce, it's also incredibly important that you take part in this educational process, not only to communicate that the project is important to you and fits into your goals and your agency's vision, but that you are committed to learning this as well. I had the opportunity to sit through a panel discussion on some real-time crime center technology, and there was a chief who was on the panel who talked about how powerful this was when he went out into the community. He just retired in the last year, but when he went out into the community and said, hey, I can do this. This is simple. This is easy to learn. If I can do it, my officers can do it. If I can do it the right way, they can do it the right way. And he really was a little self-deprecating, but he said, if I can do it, they can do it for sure. But it shows that commitment from the agency head as well. We all know that people work differently with technology. Some people do pick it up faster than others. You might see this in certain generations. Others might require one-to-one training or some type of hands-on practice, where others pick it up really well in a group instructional setting. But if you, the chief or the agency head, can model that for your people, that it's important to you and you're willing to do what it takes to learn, you will likely develop more buy-in from your officers. Additionally, if the technology is important to you, the chief, you have to be incredibly careful how you discuss the project. I read a quote recently that said, if you won't say it in the boardroom, don't say it in the hallway. Right? If you're not going to say it at the command staff table, then don't communicate it in the hallway with your line personnel. If there's drawbacks or reservations about this project, keep those internal or bring them up in the boardroom to people. Don't put out one face in the boardroom and then put out another face to your line personnel so you don't unintentionally undermine your own project. Miscommunication can happen if there are problems, but it's a good idea to have this consistent level of understanding all the way through. Then as your project moves forward, it's important in the communication aspect to continually communicate to people where the product stands, how it's going, and that you're on track or off track to getting to that finish line. The last thing people want is they get lots of communication on the front end and then hear nothing for months and months and months. And then all of a sudden, miraculously, it's on. No, make sure that communication stays consistent all the way throughout so that people know what's going on. They can set their expectations, they can manage those expectations, and potentially help in some ways when you need feedback. I know there was an instance where we put some cameras up and we needed feedback from the officers if it was helpful in the locations where we had put them. Because if they weren't helpful there, then we needed to move them because we were paying for them. We want them to be in the most impactful area. So that communication is key all the way through the project implementation. Then once you reach that finish line, it's important to keep that power user team together through the use of the product. You may not be meeting any week anymore, and you definitely don't need to do that. But it's helpful to come back maybe quarterly or twice a year to say, hey, is it still working the way that we wanted to? Are there any tweaks that we need to make to maybe do this better? Is there any feedback that we're getting for our personnel that would make this system or software easier for them to use? Is it tweaks or edits that we can do on our end, or is it something that maybe we should approach the vendor and give some good feedback to? And that leads me to my next point is work with your vendor to give that good feedback. Vendors are often making a product to hit the most amount of customers as possible, but they also need feedback for what's working and what's not. Some agencies use their outcome tracking, or some agencies like certain features or don't like certain features, and there's some things maybe that can or cannot change. But they only know if you tell them, and it is helpful for a vendor to get good feedback rather than always negative feedback. And sometimes the time that we want to give feedback is just when we're upset with how something isn't or is working. But giving that good feedback can not only build a relationship with your vendors, but it can also show your troops that, hey, we're committed to not only using this, but making this better and being a good customer. Once you've completed a project implementation, you've reached that finish line and you're going back and doing maybe your quarterly or twice a year meetings, it's helpful to take stock and keep notes as to what went well in a project's implementation. Maybe some areas where there was trouble or other opportunities that we could do differently in the future. Maybe it's people who really excelled on your implementation team who you definitely want to be a part of every technology project moving forward. Or maybe there's some folks that you're like, man, this was really fun. I'm glad you got to do this and have this experience, but this was clearly not in your wheelhouse. And it's okay if you don't want to be a project team moving forward. But it can be helpful to keep some of these notes and records to say, this is what worked, this is what didn't. So 2 years from now, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, you can keep this record of what is working, what isn't working, and build a really effective and efficient implementation team to help keep driving your agency forward.